All right, so our virtual presentation poster is about what happens to student learning when sensory breaks are implemented in conjunction with the DIR model.
So just a little introduction to it. So children on the autism spectrum seek sensory input from their environment to help them become regulated, calm, and focused within a classroom setting. So this model, the DIR floor time model, it's separated into three components: functional, emotional, developmental capacities, individual processing differences, and relationships and interactions. So this model has been used in the United States, but it's slowly making its way to Canada. We've personally had experience with it. And then going into sensory breaks, they're also known as sensory diets, and they're something that are commonly used by occupational therapists when working with children on the autism spectrum. So we're really looking at, because sensory breaks aren't a part of this model, we want to see if the DIR model would benefit from incorporating this into it.
All right, so now we're just going to go into some of the definitions. So, DIR model is developmental individual relationship-based model. It is a framework that helps clinicians, parents, and educators conduct a comprehensive assessment and develop an intervention program tailored to the unique challenges and strengths of children with autism spectrum disorders and other developmental challenges. And then sensory breaks are planned control sensory input in accordance with the needs of the child and are characterized by an emphasis on sensory stimulation and active participation of the client and involve client-directed activities.
Next is floor time. So it's the heart of the DIR floor time model, and it's basically the play component of the program for infants, children, adolescents, and their families. It has a variety of developmental challenges, including autism spectrum disorders. And then just a definition of autism spectrum disorder. It's described in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in the fourth edition as a mental disorder that displays three critical deficits. So one, impaired development of social interactions; two, impaired development of communication; and three, a restricted range of activities or interests.
We're going to get into the DIR model and what it's really about. So the D stands for developmental, the I starts for individual, and the R is for relationships. Um, so looking at the research, there was a study of 200 children with ASD between the ages of 22 months and 4 years old that received a DIR-based intervention program. It targeted the relationships in the child's developmental level and processing differences and language functioning. So the main goal of the study was to see how all three of these components would be affected by the appropriate DIR intervention. The results of this study showed that 116 out of 200 of the children were learning how to relate and engage with warmth and trust. Children learned how to interact and read and respond to social signals and developed stronger capacities for imagination, imaginative play, and creative and meaningful use of language.
To the second part of the model, which is floor time. So these were once two separate models, and then they were brought together. So within our literature, one piece explains how following the child's lead in play is the most known component of the floor time model, and by doing so, it creates meaningful relationships and it validates emotional experiences. And then following the child's lead and making their interests the main experience actually encourages the child to allow you into their emotional life. So it's kind of like gaining trust from them. So overall, together, both the DIR and floor time model and its authors, who are Stanley Greenspan and Serena Wider, suggest that the modern developmental relationship-based approach that works together with children diagnosed with autism and their families, it focuses on the goal of strengthening their developmental capacities for relating, communicating, and thinking. So through the combination of both the DIR and floor time interventions, a child diagnosed with autism is carefully assessed, looking at their functional development level, their individual differences and challenges, and as well as their relationships with caregivers and peers. And then the educational team will, together with the parents, develop an individualized functional profile that takes into account the child's unique features and serves as a basis for creating their very own tailored intervention program.
Sensory breaks on their own. So, when looking specifically at children who are on the autism spectrum, they find it hard to self-regulate. In turn, they then try to seek sensory stimuli from the environment around them to help calm them down or regulate their nervous systems. Children on the autism spectrum or children with sensory processing disorders, they have trouble with stimuli in the environment, which then causes them to have short attention spans, which then causes them to have repetitive movements or behaviors that have no purpose for the environment that they're in. There have been studies conducted and talked about in the article. We found an article called The Effects of a Multisensory Environment on Negative Behavior and Functional Performance on Individuals with Autism. It talks about a study that reported sensory integration to have a decrease in tactile defensiveness, improvement in communication skills, and reduction in stress, a reduction in self-injurious behaviors, improvement of staff-client interaction, increase in length of calmness. So when children have the opportunity to participate in a specifically structured gross motor activity, they are able to self-regulate. Once the child has had the opportunity to self-regulate, they are then ready to become part of the classroom environment. Upon returning to the classroom, the child will then have the ability to focus better on the task at hand. This is something that Ashley and I have both witnessed as we have done an internship at a private school for children on the autism spectrum, and they really integrated sensory breaks into the daily routines of all the children.
Data sources that we would think about using if this were to actually be conducted. We thought of anecdotal notes, so observation notes will be made based on the behaviors seen in the classrooms. We will look at when students begin to escalate and how stepping out for a sensory break affects these escalations. We also thought one-on-one interviews would be beneficial. So we would conduct these interviews with different educators who use the DIR floor time model and sensory breaks basically every day. So the questions will be open-ended, allowing for participants to answer freely. And then we also used feedback and added surveys. So we thought about asking occupational therapists and parents who have experience using sensory breaks in the DIR model.
The setting that we chose was 3 educators at Oakwood Academy, which is the private school that Ashley and I have both completed our internships at. The children in the classroom, the researchers were placed in. The 3 educators that have been chosen are a developmental therapist and educational support specialist, an ECE and youth worker who has taught at Oakwood for 5 years, and the teacher whose class the researchers Ashley and Ashley were placed in to conduct the study. And students will also participate in the research if given consent by their parents.
To go over some ethical considerations that we would think about when and if this research would be conducted. We would always make sure to give out consent forms explaining what the study is. We will also be available to answer any questions, so we would provide them with our email addresses or phone numbers, whatever we feel comfortable with. We would always get a signature from the participants. So interview recordings would be destroyed 1 week after the transcriptions were made, and this would be known to the participants. There will also be no actual names attached to information provided, and the research collected, it would be locked in a file on either laptop that can only be accessed with a password. To make a mind map basically of what we thought connected with sensory breaks throughout the DIR model. So in the darker colors, you see here knowing the child, need more evidence, building relationships, and self-regulation. So this is also a bunch of stuff that we found in our resources. So in knowing the child, we found that individual needs are being looked at, they're unique, they have an individualized plan, and they have usually occupational therapists working with the children. Self-regulation is a big one because that is basically sensory breaks. So it's knowing your body. It's about focus, having calm bodies, and communication. Building relationships. So there's always a two-way communication, one-on-one, trust and respect, and then having that trust relationship with the child. And then needing more evidence. So gathering data, more research, more observations. We found that there were a good amount of cases, but we feel like that there could be more. And we feel that all in all, this all ties into the research that we found on sensory breaks and how it can relate to the DIR model.
Running this action research study would support our knowledge of teaching or influence our knowledge of teaching because it will give us another model to use with students on the autism spectrum. As we see in our placements, we are seeing more students who do need individualized plans. So we feel that having this knowledge and incorporating sensory breaks would be beneficial to all students. And thank you for listening. This was Ashley and Ashley.
So this is our full poster that we just did our voiceover to for you. That's it.